In the previous chapter, we have started creating the Joshua application. Here it is. It's a small app that allows us to have a little talk with our computer or our phone. It says, "Greetings, Professor Falcon." You can click on "Hello, Joshua," and then we have an answer. You see what I've added here. I've added three labels, actually three text views technically, and buttons. When I click on the red one, then Joshua's greetings turn red, same thing for green, and same thing for blue. So we're just improving a little bit the previous application. So now you are aware of our goal for this chapter. The very first thing we're going to do is to set up the layout. The very first item of this layout in the hierarchy, the one that we call the root item, is a linear layout. A linear layout is basically a container that will show the items the one after each other horizontally or vertically, depending on the orientation. We'll have so a text, a button, three labels, and three radio buttons. Okay, so let's have a deeper look now. We'll have a first linear layout, vertical linear layout. Then we'll have a text view with the greetings. Then we'll have three labels, actually three text views, red, green, and blue. And we'll make sure that the font color will be black so that it can be readable. And of course, then we'll have those three radio buttons, but not three independent radio buttons. We'll have three radio buttons that will be included in a radio group. Okay, perfect. We know what we want to do. Now we're going either to draw this structure, this layout with the graphical tool, or use the XML editor. So here we are in the XML editor, main.xml. The first thing we're going to do is to make sure that there's no issue with the existing code. For what we want to do, we have a first linear layout, it's a vertical one, then a text view, and a button. Everything looks good. This being said, something's missing. At one time we will want to change the color of this text view. So in our Java code we will have to create a text view object and do a search with find view by ID. And that's the problem. There's no ID here. So I'm going to create one. Android ID equals, and I'm going to call it my message. That's perfect. Now we can start creating an horizontal linear layout. And this linear layout is our container that will include our three labels. So linear layout, Android. For the width, we'll use fill parent. For the height, we'll set it as 20 pixels. I don't want this to take all the screen. And I will define the orientation horizontal. So inside this layout, I'm going to create my first text view. So the red one. So it's a text view. I know I'm going to surprise you a little bit, but for the layout width, I will use fill parent. And let's see what it's doing. Android layout height fill parent. It will take all the available space, that is to say 20 pixels here. Now I'm going to define the font color. Oh, the background color first. Let's do background, and it's like in HTML or CSS. So FF0000 stands for red. And now let's do the text color. And we said we wanted it to be black. And the text itself, so I'm going to hard code it, but you should not do that. You know that you should create an entry in the strings.xml or any other value file. But as I mentioned, I'm not going necessarily to do that in this training, just for the purpose of saving time. We have to take also into account that we're only building demos here. So that's the first text view. I'm just using cut-paste, copy-paste to create the two other text views, changing the color for green and blue. And now I'm saving, and I'm gonna check the result. Well, not necessarily what I was expecting, even in portrait mode. But that's not very surprising, because here, for the first text view, I have a fill parent width, so it's taking all the space. So here I'm going to introduce a new concept and set up a layout weight equals to 1. Same thing for the green button and same thing for the blue button. So let's see what it's doing. So I'm saving, I'm checking, and it's a little bit better. So the weight concept, it's a ratio, and they all have a weight of 1. So let's add all those numbers. 1 plus 1 plus 1, that's 3. They all have 1 as a weight, so a ratio of 1/3 actually. So it's just spreading the available space evenly. Now let's have a look. It's better. It's a little bit better. I will probably want to center the content of those text views, which is easy. New concept, gravity. So the vocabulary is different, but the concept is the same one as in CSS. Okay, here we're going to use center. Same thing for the green button. Same thing for the blue button. Saving. Checking. It looks good. Now I will create my radio group that will contain our three radio buttons. Let's do that. So of course we'll start after the closing of this linear layout. That's a radio group. Layout with fill parent. We're going to use the same weight trick. So for the height, we're going to say wrap content. No need to space. We need to take the entire available space. We're gonna set an ID, and we're going to call this guy my radio group. And let's not forget to set up the orientation. And we want it to be horizontal. Perfect. I will now create my first button. So it's a radio button. Android with... Okay, I like when the editor is helping me. I'm a little bit lazy. So fill parent for the width. Layout height fill parent. So for the same as for the text views, we're going to set up a layout weight equal 1. We are going to set up an ID. My radio button red. And now we can close this first radio button and create 2 new ones with copy and paste. Green, blue. I just save it and I check. It's almost correct. The radio buttons are not using the gravity property, and I'm going to use a margin, layout, margin left, and we're using 35 dp. We'll talk about that, the dp concept. Same thing for the 2 other buttons. I'm saving, checking, and it seems that we're done. So let's talk about those dp. But we'll also need to talk about the px, in, mm, pt, and sp. We have already used px, pixels. So 20 pixels are 20 real pixels on your screen. So from one photo to another, the space 20 pixels can take may be different depending on the resolution of the screen and the size of the screen. If you want a real measure in inches or millimeters, you're going to use IN or mm for millimeters. You can use PT, it's a point. You have probably used points in the past with word processors. This is a definition. A point is a 1/72th of an inch. That's something we are not going to use very often, very honestly. But we're going to use dp and sp. So first, a dp is a density independent pixels. It's an abstract unit that is based on the physical density of the screen. These units are relative to a 160 dpi screen, which is not the case for all the screens. So 1 dp is 1 pixel on those screens, and the ratio of dp to pixel will change with the screen density, of course, but not necessarily in the direct proportion. And you have to note that the compiler accepts both dip and dp, but dp is more consistent with sp. So sp, the scale independent pixels, it's like the dp unit, but it is also scaled by the user's font size preference. It is recommended that you use this unit when specifying font size, just so that they will be adjusted for both the screen density and the user's preference. Basically, I like big characters on my computer, on my phone. Then you should use big characters in your application, and that's what we're going to do with using SP. So I know it's a lot of information, but you'll see it's easy to use. Okay, now let's go back to our programming, and let's do the Java programming since we're done with the XML. First thing, we're going to create the different objects that we're going to need, and we're going to define them here, just here, and you would understand why. So our first text view, my message, and then we will need a listener for our radio group. So it's going to be an object of on-click listener type, and we'll call it my radio click listener. So I'm importing the missing classes. So here there's a small issue. Oh no, here what's interesting is Eclipse doesn't know which one, which class to import. Eclipse has a doubt. So it's telling me that it could be a view on-click listener. It could also be a dialog interface on-click listener. Of course, for us here it's the first one. And now I will look for those objects with the find view by ID, my message, so find by view ID r.id dot my message. Okay, next. So now my radio click listener. So these are pretty big variable names, so I'm using control space to have the auto-completion. So my radio click listener equals new on-click listener. And I'm going to ask the import of the class, or what's okay, and the unimplemented methods, of course. And perfect. And there's something wrong here. It's not find. Yeah, okay, it's find view by ID. Really, I mistyped that. So the unimplemented method is on click. And let's save some space here. Perfect. So what are we going to do here when the listener will take control of the application? It's going to run this onClick with this parameter. The parameter is v, which is a view. View is a generic object, but we as a developer, we know that it's going to be a radio button. So we just cast this object just because it's making sense. So it's a cast of a radio button. So when we'll be there, we will know that a radio button has been clicked. Now, which one? That's what will tell us my radio button dot get what? Get ID. Now, we're going to have a different behavior if the radio button clicked is the red one, the green one, or the blue one. So of course, we're going, and that's why I removed the semicolon, we're going to use a switch. In the case of the red button, so the ID will be r.id.myRadioButtonRed. Well, in this case, I will do my message, and I will change the color. So set text color, and here we can use a constant which is in the color class, color.red, and then break. Of course, same code for almost the same code for the green button and the blue button. I'm saving, and now I'm importing the color class that was missing. I'm saving, and now that's done. I've created my radio click listener. Now I'm not going to create 3 different listeners. I cannot have an object with 3 listeners, but I can have a listener attached to 3 different objects, and that's what I'm going to do here. So the same listener for all the 3 different radio buttons. So first, of course, I need to create those radio buttons. So let's be short here. RB red, RB green, RB blue. I'm importing the radio button object. Let's say that RB red is what's gonna get me find you by ID with r.id.myRadio button red. That's it. Okay. Now same thing for green. I said green, and same thing for blue. Okay. Of course, I need to change that also. And now I just have to connect the buttons with the listeners. Sorry, I have to connect the buttons with the listener, only one. So for the red button, set on click listener. I'm going to do the same thing for the 2 other radio buttons. I'm saving, and I'm going to run the application. So now let's switch to the emulator. Here it is. So let's first make sure I didn't break anything. I click here and I still have the would you like to play a game of chess? Perfect. And when I click on the radio buttons, yes, it's changing the color of the gratings. So that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to do. So that's it for this chapter. As you can see, there are a lot of mechanical stuff when programming Android applications. So a very good exercise for you would be to get familiar